Okay, hello everyone. I have us right at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Hello and welcome. On behalf of the Resource Management Institute, I would like to welcome you to our last Power Up webcast of the year on developing better forecasts. Today, we want to share the latest best practices for forecasting and how better process and technology can make forecasting a strength of your team. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that we are recording today's webcast. Later today, you should be receiving an email with a link to the recording. Also, we have made a PDF copy of the deck available. We have added it to the handouts window in your GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to download that. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please add them to your questions window in your GoToWebinar panel. We'll have a brief question and answer session at the end as time permits. Okay, our Power Up webinars, for those who joined us before, are just 30 minutes, so let's get started. Presenting today's webinar is the Managing Director of the RMI, Randy Mislovic. Randy, welcome. I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, great. Thomas, thank you very much. Do a quick sound check. Is coming through okay?
Audio sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, welcome to our final broadcast of 2020 in our Power Up on developing better forecasts. This is a great topic. I hope you'll enjoy the content today. I especially want to say thanks to our three sponsors for our broadcast today: Keyed-In, MavenLink, and Sciforma. You know, as we all know, in our project-based businesses, having a good PPM or PSA tool is pretty important to getting the job done. Hopefully enabling the right kind of robust processes, and we're going to talk about one of those processes today, and that's forecasting. But again, really appreciate Keyed-In, MavenLink, and Sciforma sponsoring this broadcast for us today. So for those of you who are new, I'll do a quick reintroduction for the RMI. We are dedicated to the advancement of resource and workforce management, thought leadership, best practices, standards, and globally recognized credentials around the resource and workforce management area. And we're helping companies every day with things like improving project performance, resource utilization, customer sat, and employee engagement, all things that are heavily impacted and influenced by good or bad resource management. And we do this at the RMI through best practice definition, extensive market research. If you haven't checked out our library, I'll show you a sample or two of that today. But our market research, which drives a lot of our white paper content, and it's a great library. So if you're trying to benchmark your organizations, we got some really good research for you, and you know, getting access to that data is free. Training education for resource managers, and of course industry collaborations and events like this, and our annual symposium and other events that we run. So that's a bit about us. We do have a website, resourcemanagementinstitute.com. If you haven't been there, I'd love for you to join us as a member. Up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see this little join button. You just give us a little bit of information, and you'll get information and access behind the firewall to our various events, the research, our white paper, library, and other things. As a part of doing that, you can opt out at any time if you choose to do so. The RMI provides opportunities to collaborate through events like this. As an example, we also got some great forum tools, so the members are encouraged to communicate with them about questions, issues, problems, communicate with us through our forum tools. Opportunities to get educated in resource management. We've got a great lineup of classes, from RM training for beginners to a full certification program to our new advanced RM class that we just introduced in the last couple of months. So we've got some great courseware out there for you. And lastly, the ability to innovate and innovate using our insights, again, our research, our white papers. We keep recordings of these various topics. We have guest speakers, client speakers come in and talk about how they're doing this in their businesses. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And then our RMCP resource management certified professionals get access to a special tool set to help them with their resource management job every day. So that's a bit about us, and with that, I'll get on to it. I did want to mention that if you didn't see this recently, we just introduced our new resource management maturity model. You can get it through the website. Again, it's free to download and access. We are working on a version 2 of that. We're going to expand on it a bit, but we've gotten great feedback from the many people who've downloaded the maturity model, and if you haven't looked at it, I encourage you to download it and take a look. So let's get on with the topic at hand today, developing better forecasts. And I thought that showing a piece of research would be helpful to all of you as I understand why this is important. Now, I'm guessing there's not too many people on the phone that don't already understand how important a forecast is to doing work in resource management. It is, in this particular slides out of a research report we published in the second quarter of this year. It was on inhibitors to resource management, and this particular group was the professional consulting services team. We also surveyed other project-based organizations like enterprise IT, marketing agencies, and product development. In professional consulting services, 84%, number one issue for these organizations was forecasting and capacity planning, and forecasting driving that issue. Very similar on enterprise IT. I want to say the number was 57%. I think it was second on their list, and also high on the list of the other project-based organizations or domains that we surveyed. But this has been for all 4.5 years of our time as an institute, and our parent company, RTM Consulting, that does consulting in this space, has been the number one issue for people conducting resource management. And it's just, human capital decisions, we all know, take time. They happen generally in terms of months. And so therefore, if you can't have a good forecast for your human capital needs with some level of granularity out 3, 4, 5, 6 months, you're already behind the curve relative to your planning, and that turns you rapidly into a reactive resource management and delivery organization. So forecasting is important, and that's why we have this. I think was the second biggest power up draw we've had in our 4.5 years. Is a lot of people interested in this particular topic. So I'm going to go through and share with you some best practice information about developing better forecasts. And hopefully you'll be able to take those back to your organizations and use some of this to your benefit. I'll start with a simple definition, and that forecasting is really, we think of it in 2 dimensions. One is the demand forecast, and the second is the supply forecast, and both are important. And too often we see organizations that are forecasting demand but not supply, and both need to be paid attention to. But the demand forecast simply is defining demand by client or by project or by resource type with some level of granularity. And so irrespective of whether or not your delivery team is focused on external clients or internally focused like an internal enterprise IT organization on internal services, is having some kind of a forecast around what your project expectations are over the next 30 to 180 days. Pretty important, all right, because then you can start to match that up with your supply forecast, and that's sources of available resources. And so there's a lot that goes into that, right? It's who do I have, where are they at, what are their competencies, are they able to do these kind of projects, what kind of attrition do I expect over that 6-month period of time? Do I have a hiring plan to bring new people in? What about reskilling? Those sorts of things I have to do. So there's a lot that goes on in this supply forecast. Is who's in training? When will they be done? When will they actually be able to do that kind of work? So these 2 things come together to support the definition of actions that are necessary to prepare available resources to meet the needs of a forecast demand. So real important here, definitional, maybe kind of basic to some of you, but important that you pay attention to both of these dimensions as it relates to forecasting. So, so why is this important? Again, I've mentioned a couple of these things, but I'll start with, in a delivery organization, 3/4 of your budget is typically tied up in human capital. So, if you're not paying attention to that line item, I don't know what else would be more important than that. adjusting to changes, as I shared, in both capacity and capability takes time. How long does it take you to onboard? How long does it take you to reskill existing talent? Because knowing with enough lead time is really critical here. I was talking to a services executive of a very large business yesterday who, when I asked him about their forecasting, he said, well, out 30 days, I'm pretty accurate about 90% of the time. But you go to 31 days and beyond, it drops to well below 50%. And we both talked about how that quickly puts you behind the curve because, again, most of the time as I'm trying to find skilled resources, that takes longer than 30 days. So we really got to get in front of the curve. A topic that not a lot of people talk about, but we as a best practice at the RMI talk about building a bench. And the bench, whether you are serving internal clients or external clients, is particularly for the larger businesses, pretty important. Now, a real small business, you got 10 or 12 people, having a bench, probably not affordable. But if you're a great big business, having a bench available of people that can support business development needs for external clients when you're trying to do business capture, or for those internal projects where you're being asked for time and support for looking at a particular delivery project that you might commit to, those require resources too, and too many times it happens in the margin, and we really encourage people to think about doing that with some kind of a bench plan. And then lastly is this whole thing enables you to get proactive. I mentioned earlier, if you're not doing good at forecasting, you're a reactive organization. It's just how it works, and you find yourself with, these groups of people. It never surprises me any longer when we go and look at an organization in detail around what they do and how they're actually getting people to staff to projects. A lot of management, senior management, director time being spent playing phone tag, email tag, trying to find people at the last minute for projects that are important internally or externally, but didn't get planned for in the right way in the resource management process. So we hope to help try to put that behind you with a different approach. So one of the top 5 reasons, and I'm going to come back to this because it's important that I show you how, when we talk about the best practices to eliminate these inhibitors, what those practices are. So I'll start with lacking a formal methodology. Is most organizations, if you're good at resource management, you have a formal documented methodology for resource management that people have been trained in. It is, most people have a project management methodology. Will tell you they have that. At the quality methodology, they have that. But all too often we find that we don't have a documented methodology and we don't have training that's been done for that organization. So, if you come to our one of our training courses that gets certified, you learn just-in-time resourcing, and we've got a methodology. You walk away with a robust commercial grade process for resource management. And by the way, you don't have to use ours. If you'd rather build your own, that's really up to you. But you got to get a formal methodology. We just provide a fast path to one that's being used at hundreds of companies around the globe. Second is interlock processes. As we teach in our certification program, is interlock on process is really important. We all know there are different groups are involved. We got people, if you're an external client-focused organization like marketing agency, you got clients that are driving demand and the sales teams that are working that, and therefore they've got a good handle on what those inbounds look like. The business folks that are working with you in a product development shop or a construction organization or an enterprise IT organization, they've got that data. And we really recommend you get together with some kind of frequency for the long-range budget process at least once a year, for the ongoing staffing and work we're doing projects. This is probably more like a monthly process where the right people are sitting in a room looking at the forecast together and coming together with the best data you've got to agree on whether or not we've got a good solid forecast or not. Latency of the data. Really important. I think you all know this, is that the data is, when I've asked a question, when we get involved with an organization that wants us to help them look at their situation at a deeper level, one of the questions we ask is, like on forecasting, is so how good is the data? And jokingly, most people tell us we can look backwards 15 days really accurately, and we can look forward 10 to 15 days somewhat accurately, and beyond that it gets weaker and weaker. This latency of the data is really a challenge for a lot of organizations, so a place to focus. Incomplete or unreliable supply and demand data. So I talked about what the definitions of those are. It's important that we get good definitions of those. And then lastly, that somebody is held accountable for this. And when I come to my best practice slide, I'll share this, but it's 75% of your budget. Measure it, incentivize people, and hold people accountable for that. Now, where does forecasting fit? It fits in one of three places, and it fits actually in all these three places, but they each have plays a different role. So all of us, most of us, many of us who are on a calendar year basis just got done or are in the middle of or hopefully finishing our 2021 planning basis, and some kind of a forecast went into that budget planning that we used, and that's one place our forecast gets used is for long range planning, typically the budgeting process that happens end of year. And for those of you who are on fiscal year basis, it's the 2 or 3 months prior to the end of your fiscal year. Forecasting then is on the 1 to 6 month basis is kind of I'll say the centerpiece of this process for the projects you have going on over the next 6 months. And this is where you're constantly looking at this and saying, is my forecast right? Is my forecast right? Because in 2 or 3 months when I got to start this particular project, because I think I'm going to have to do it, am I going to have the people available to do it? And then lastly is in the actual 0 to 30 days. This is where the rubber hits the road. We are in the thick of it. We're starting projects today, tomorrow, next week, and you're working on these staffing, but yet looking out 2 or 3 months or further, I'm sorry, 2 or 3 weeks or further is really important, because as you got a project start in 3 weeks, is the forecast right that you're really going to have the supply side in place to help you get done with that? By the way, I just see some questions coming in, just to let people know at the end. I'm going to save time at the end. I'm going to try to address as many of the questions that have come in as I can. So that's where the forecasting process fits. So what good looks like. So this is probably the most important page that I wanted to share with you today, because it really represents a lot of the best of our best practice thinking when it comes to resource and workforce management. So I stuck in the upper left-hand corner of this, as I told you I would earlier, that the 5 things that tend to get in the way, and hopefully I will have shown you how I make those 5 things go away if you agree to do the things that I'm going to show you on the right side of this page. And so it starts with a forecasting methodology. Get one. Too often we see organizations where disparate organizations are coming to the table for an interlock, and they've all kind of looked at how they forecast in a different way. Organizations need to get to a single methodology for forecasting. It's really, really important. Again, in our certification training, we provide you a methodology. It's quite a simple one, but I will tell you it's simple on purpose because it works. And it doesn't have to be the one that you choose to use. But I'll tell you this is adopt a methodology that you're comfortable with. Measure and build a baseline. How accurate are we for forecasting today? So this should be pretty easy for most organizations to look backwards 6 months and say, okay, with each month, how far out was I able to accurately forecast? Clearly, nobody's ever going to be perfect at this. A forecast is just that, it's a forecast. But it's important that you have one, you set a baseline, and then focus on continuous improvement as you work your way through that. So, okay. So, second, data. I have said a million times to this audience and others, resource management, I've been in the tech industry more than 40 years. I've never seen a more data-intensive discipline than resource management. There may be others out there, but this one's really data-intensive. And I would also say, though, he or she who collects the most data and puts it to work wins. Because there's all kinds of ways, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but all kinds of ways to use this data to not only serve our purposes in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, but also to take that data and put it to work for us to strategically get better at labor planning. So data, pretty important. It's data-intensive environment, and so know where you're collecting the data, and by the way, start to measure the quality of that data over time, so as you're trying to improve forecasting, that you're also improving your data quality. Most organizations today have some kind of data quality expert, particularly the larger ones, and so have them help you with this if that's an area that needs help. Accountability. So this can't be the resource management office with a responsibility to forecast and get resources right. This has got to be a multifunctional commitment to those people who are accountable to a forecast methodology that you've agreed upon, to data quality that you've agreed upon, and then be accountable for this. And we would strongly encourage as a best practice that ownership be through some kind of assigned metrics, like a forecast accuracy index is an example of something we've seen people use. And actually in some cases to incentivize. If we're really bad at it, we need to get better, put some incentive behind it to get people to focus on getting better and being more accountable for the result. Then the interlock. So I mentioned this earlier, and it's one of those things that's up here in my upper left-hand corner about no interlock processes in place. This is where either whether you're externally client focused or internally client focused, the people who generate demand, who have the best handle on demand, are sitting in the room looking with the delivery team at that forecast and trying to make sure that we have something that we can depend on. And by the way, hopefully focusing on, are we getting better every month at this and getting closer to the mark? Because those teams that focus on this do get better, and they get, by the way, dramatically better when we see that they're really focused on it. And then, by the way, the people on the supply side. So if you're on the delivery side, obviously you've really thought through my delivery side and how am I going to support the demand that is being put in front of me, again, whether it's internally required demand or externally required demand. But typically we'll find this as in the RMCP training, we teach people that look, on the annual budgeting process. This is a once a year kind of thing. There might be some iteration of that, but for the typical day-to-day kind of stuff, we're talking about generally people will adopt a monthly meeting where the right parties are sitting in a room together, and your frequency may be, instead of once a month, maybe it's every 2 months, or maybe it's once every 2 weeks. But the interlock process itself is something that really does need to occur. And by the way, it's a great place for you to start to educate those people who are involved in that ecosystem to understand the impact of a good forecast versus a bad one. If you're in a sales organization and you've got a wildly understated forecast, and then all of a sudden they come in with a sale that they didn't have in there because they were, for whatever reason, didn't have it, and now you don't have the people to deliver, it makes people mad. And the same thing's true in reverse, right? So it's really important this interlock thing get put in place, and that people have assigned goals to that, and that they're accountable to attend these interlock get-togethers. Analysis. So use the data. So now I got all this data. So I'm kind of thinking of these first three things: forecasting, data, accountability, your interlock, driving some kind of a ongoing staffing process. Now we're starting to see some of the more leadership PSA PPM tools are starting to incorporate some artificial intelligence into their tools to help with staffing selection. Certainly most of those tools have some BI capabilities. A lot of organizations have supplemented their systems with BI capabilities. But beyond the obvious of trying to make it faster and easier to put the right people on the right projects at the right moment in time, if you've got all this data here, you could be looking back at what has happened, and then really help yourself with something I call strategic labor planning. Is really kind of forecasting out, okay, well, if I look forward 6 months, is there a way to acquire my labor more inexpensively? Is there a way to do a better job of putting the right mix of labor on the right jobs, so not overskilling or underskilling? Am I hiring the people or acquiring them in the right geographic locations? And the list goes on and on. I talked about this at our conference a couple of years ago, and in a fair amount of detail, and I called it a mega trend of resource management. But a pretty important one is this analysis piece. And hope that you'll be thinking about that. Accuracy is really important. So these are the things that I would ask you to be thinking about. Just some tips from the trenches to focus on is, I mentioned, start with the simple methodology, but have one. Establish a baseline from which continuous improvement can be targeted. Change management's pretty important here in your organizations, and don't be too hard on yourselves. You're never going to get perfect, but 50% forecast accuracy is not where you want to be. 4 key takeaways. Good forecast is essential to resource management, as I shared, if you can't look out 3 to 6 months pretty accurately, you're already behind the curve. Forecasting supports our long-range strategic plan, our ongoing activities, and our immediate planning. Those things I had on my best practice slide, which you can go back to, are the things that will help you do that. Your methodology, reliable data, accountability, analysis, and support interlocks, all really important. And by the way, again, don't forget good change management. So before I take some questions, I just cover a couple quick things here. Quick commercial on it. If you haven't been, we've got 650 companies that have put some number of their people through this certification program. It's a one-of-a-kind place for your resource managers to learn best practices, get access to our toolkit, and collaborate with their industry peers. We've got lots of companies that are doing this. It's really growing fast for us. Would encourage you to look into it if you haven't already. The course is we teach just-in-time resourcing, which is our process approach to resource management incorporates these 6 elements into how you actually do it. You've heard me say in prior broadcasts, if you don't have these 6 things in place, doesn't matter whose methodology you use, and you're not going to be effective at resource management. We teach the class in class, online. We've got a class with a big group going through right now, and there's also an on-demand format which has become very, very popular, where you can get access to it 24/7. There's a certification exam and a recertification process every 2 years to maintain your certification. Here's the pricing for the various versions of the class, and the materials and testing fee are all included in our approach. And by the way, if you're a PMI, PMP, you can also earn PDUs going through the program as well. We've got a class coming up in Cincinnati, although I will give a early warning that due to COVID, we are likely to have to cancel this. We do have some people enrolled in it, and we're giving them advice to let them know that if we do cancel, here's your options. And then, we do have an online session starting early in the year in February, and you can attend that as well, and don't forget our on-demand version of the class. Before I go to the Q&A, I just want to say we are hoping to be able to run our conference, which we had to cancel this past September, in Dallas, Texas. For those of you who've been to the 2 prior ones, we had 138 people attend our second one from 50 plus companies, and great opportunity, day-and-a-half long conference for you to collaborate with your industry peers and hear from the very best experts in the industry around resource management. So I hope you'll go to our website and take a look at that. Again, a thanks to Keaton, Maven Lake, and Sciforma for getting behind and helping us with this. And with that, I really appreciate their sponsorships, and I'm going to take the last few minutes we have and try to answer some questions that have come in here. So here's a question. It said, a global organization with 300 workers on 100 projects, what is a good starting point to improve a global resource forecast process, given that each global region already has their own process? So, first of all, I'd be focused on historical data to see how good you're actually good at it, or how accurate is it. I do some internal education to get people committed to why having a common approach to the methodology would benefit the enterprise. And then I'd do establish a baseline and work on continuous improvement would be, my thoughts there. I hope that's helpful input. With COVID and the accelerated pace of replanning, is 90 days out still too late for planning? And reading business in 2020, accelerated pace to plan and replan. So 90 days, I'll say, is a short window, but at least it's better than 30 days, which is what we see all too often. It depends on how quickly you're able to acquire resources. And if you go through the typical hiring and onboarding, training, I got some, mirroring time and stuff like that, that usually takes at least 3 months for most organizations. Maybe you're better at that, but 6 months, we always tell people, is way better, because that's where the cycle of human capital stuff happens to be most of the time. Someone asked a question, what's a reasonable maximum size audience for the interlock meeting? In my prior question, I referred to hundreds of projects. This is a source by a set of 100 people managers, project requesters, which make, the the size of the group is certainly can't be unwieldy, and I don't know that I have an exact number for me to tell you that you should focus on, but I think we all know meeting dynamics are the more people you put in a room, the more unproductive we become. So focus on fewer is better. How frequently should forecasts be realigned? We think again is particularly unless you have just a small number of really big projects that last a long time, at least once a month is kind of where we tell people to go with that. Is pretty important here. Do you have examples of good forecast report format the reports that you can provide? Some of those I think are out there in our toolkit for the RMCPs. I do believe there's, I know in when you take the course, we actually give you copies of those things. Anyway, okay. I know I didn't get to all of the questions, but we're right at the top of the hour here. I'm going to try to respond to a few of these offline here, Thomas, but I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, Randy, we thanks for sending in those questions, everyone. We are still getting some in, and we do want to get those answered. So we can follow up with those individually, so appreciate that. I do want to thank everyone for joining us today and spending some time to talk about this. Randy, really do appreciate your time as well. We are wrapping up here. I do want to mention that this was our last Power Up of the year, but we have 4 more scheduled for next year. We're excited to bring these to you. We think they're being well received in the industry as we get more and more people registering for them. So next year, we're going to focus on topics like managing a flexible workforce. We're going to spend some time even talking about diving deeper into data management. Randy spent some time talking about the importance of that on one of those slides. So we're going to have a whole Power Up dedicated to that. So be on the lookout for more topics coming in. And one last plug for the state of resource management. This is our yearly look and deep dive into resource management. That will be early next year, probably a March timeframe. So we will be promoting that on our website. And if you join the RMI, you'll be getting emails about that for us as well. So be on the lookout for the 2021 state of resource management. And with that, again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Randy, thank you. Thanks to our sponsors, Keaton, Maven Link, and Cyforma. And that's it for us. We're signing off. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.